The echo of screeching tires rang through the vast, empty parking garage. Ralph Stenson shuffled through the rows of parked cars, the polished concrete underfoot reflecting the bright overhead lights. His breath was heavy with anxiety, a storm brewing within him. The day had started like any other, but as the clock ticked toward noon, everything had unraveled. It all began in the boardroom, where Ralph had given his all during the important merger meeting. He had meticulously prepared, expecting his ideas to resonate with the board. But as the discussions unfolded, his presentations were overshadowed by Greg Turner, an executive with a penchant for dramatics and a way of twisting every word in his favor. As the meeting progressed, Ralph felt a tightening in his chest and his frustration boiling over. No matter how much he tried to interject, his voice was drowned out by Greg's incessant chatter. Now his blood boiled as he recalled Greg's sneering remarks about Ralph's proposal, turning the room's mood against him. "It's not worth our time," Greg had said, causing Ralph's heart to sink. Fueled by indignation, he stormed out of the office, deciding then and there to confront Greg, abandoning all pretense of professionalism. His footsteps echoed ominously as he approached the parking garage. He had seen Greg's car, a sleek black sedan parked almost defiantly among the rows of less ostentatious vehicles. With determination coursing through him, Ralph marched toward it, each footfall striking the smooth concrete like a battle drum. He could feel the heat radiating from his cheeks, and with every ounce of his resolve, he felt the furious din inside him crescendo. Suddenly, there he was, Greg, leaning casually against a car, laughing on the phone, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing so close to him. Ralph's fists clenched at his sides, his vision narrowing on his adversary. In that split second, he became the embodiment of righteous fury, the unfairness of the world crystallizing in one confrontational moment. With a sudden growl, Ralph closed the distance between them, his heart pounding like a war drum. "Greg," he yelled, the word bouncing off the stark walls of the garage. Greg stopped mid-laugh, surprise washing over his face. He turned to confront Ralph, eyebrows raised as the phone slipped from his grip and tumbled to the ground. But Ralph didn't care. All he could see was red. "You think you can just belittle me in front of everyone and get away with it?" His voice was sharp, drowning out the echoes of the empty parking lot. Greg's expression shifted, amusement replaced with a hint of disbelief. "Calm down, Ralph. You're making a scene," he retorted, the slight lilt in his voice mocking, causing Ralph's anger to flare even higher. "This is why you don't get taken seriously." The words hit Ralph like a slap, igniting not just his fury but also the path to something far more dangerous. As he pointed an accusatory finger at Greg, tension crackling in the air like static electricity, the moment felt suspended, almost surreal. Around them, the sounds of the urban landscape faded, leaving only the hum of an impending confrontation. "Maybe you think you're invincible, but this isn't over," Ralph shouted, his rage tangible, each word heavy with unspent energy. Greg sneered, crossing his arms and stepping closer, narrowing the distance not just in space, but in the fierce energy between them. But just then, a loud clatter broke through their confrontation, startling them both. A traffic cone, knocked over in the scuffle, rolled across the ground with a hollow thud, as if the universe had decided to intervene. Ralph turned, startled, and in that brief moment of distraction, he spotted something glimmering beneath a parked van, something metallic and dark, moving away. The intensity of the moment twisted into uncertainty. What was it? A rat? A thief? Greg's voice snapped Ralph back. "You think you can intimidate me? You're pathetic." But Ralph's gaze was fixed on the mystery beneath the van. The real confrontation had just begun, and standing there, with Greg's taunts ringing in his ears and a mystery lurking in the shadows, Ralph realized he was on the brink of a deeper conflict, one that would test not just his anger, but his very resolve and sanity. "Let's see who's pathetic," Ralph muttered under his breath, determination rising anew as he prepared to chase the unknown, leaving Greg stunned and fuming behind him. What lay ahead would unfold in ways Ralph could never have imagined, as the password to the real confrontation was about to unlock a series of events that would change everything. As the password to the real confrontation was about to unlock a series of events that would change everything. Ralph sprinted toward the van, his instincts pushing him forward, heart racing with an unnerving mixture of adrenaline and trepidation. He bent down to peer under the vehicle, the world around him a blur of tumultuous emotions, rage at Greg, fear of the unknown. The glimmer beneath the van was like an eye, beckoning him into a labyrinth of intrigue. As he crouched and squinted, he caught sight of what had caught his attention, a small device, sleek and metallic, seemingly out of place amidst the grime of the concrete. Heart pounding, he reached for it, fingers brushing against the cool surface. The moment he lifted it, his stomach dropped. It was a small camera, its lens intact, but its purpose inscrutable. Questions swirled in his mind. Who had left it there? Was it merely a gadget abandoned in haste, or did it have a darker intent? The bile of uncertainty churned in his throat. But before he could ponder further, a sharp laugh pierced the tense air behind him. It was Greg, his tone sinister and vindictive. "Look at you, Ralph. What are you doing, playing detective?" Greg derided, stepping closer, hands in his pockets, as if he owned the atmosphere between them. Ralph felt the anger simmer again just beneath the surface, now mixed with the fear of being exposed. "Back off, Greg," Ralph snapped, standing upright and clutching the camera tightly in his grasp, as if it were a grenade primed to go off. "This is not your playground." "Oh, but it is," Greg replied, his smile infuriatingly smug. "You see, I knew you wouldn't take this lightly. You were bound to dig deeper. Just like the additional files I found stashed in your cabinet last week." Pathetic, really. The mention of the stashed files struck Ralph hard, echoing like a thunderclap in his mind. His heart sank. He had thought his records were secure, sealed tight against any prying eyes. The playful jabs turned vicious as he realized Greg operated in shadows, playing games with consequences that could ruin them both if exposed. "Are you implying you're behind this? That this is part of some sick game?" Ralph asked, voice shaking with fury and accusation as he waved the camera in front of Greg's face. "No, I'm saying you're not clever enough to unravel a thread I've been weaving for months," Greg retorted, shrugging off the confrontation as if it were merely an inconvenience. "This is bigger than you or me. You really should watch your back and your files." As Ralph stood there in disbelief, his mind raced, not just with anger at Greg, but also with desperation. Was it possible that his proposals, his dreams for the future, could be slipping away because of this man's scheming? Everything he had worked for was at stake, and in that moment, uncertainty dawned upon him. "What are you planning?" Ralph demanded, shifting to a more confrontational stance, trying to regain the upper hand, but his voice trembled slightly, revealing just how far his confidence had fractured. Greg stepped even closer, his face mere inches from Ralph's. "Let's say you focus on this little camera and forget about your career for a second. What would you do if I could make this disappear forever?" The threatening tone lingered in the air like an oppressive fog. With a sudden defiance, Ralph snapped back. "You think I'm afraid of you? I won't let you intimidate me anymore." He held up the camera as a shield against Greg's looming presence. But Greg's chuckle echoed off the concrete walls, resonating with malevolence. "Oh, Ralph, it's not about fear. It's about control. And you're already in over your head. If you're smart, you'll leave it where it belongs. This isn't a game you can win." Just as Ralph opened his mouth to retort, an unexpected sound halted their verbal warfare. A roar of engines echoed outside, a convoy of sirens and flashing lights illuminating the dim corners of the garage. Instinctively, Ralph turned toward the noise, and that's when he noticed something fleeting, a shadow darting past the tinted windows of a nearby car, the rush of a figure hastily retreating. In the span of a heartbeat, Ralph's instinct kicked in. "What was that?" he asked, suddenly acutely aware that this confrontation had spiraled into something far greater than just a petty clash between colleagues. Greg's smirk faded, confidence replaced by the cold edge of anxiety. It seems you're not the only one interested in secrets tonight, Ralph. We might have a bigger problem on our hands than I anticipated. Suddenly, both men were thrust into a precarious alliance built on the shattered remnants of their former animosity. Sensing the imminent threat, Ralph's focus shifted. The stakes had risen higher than mere career sabotage. This was no longer about outsmarting one another, it was about survival. Something was lurking in the periphery, ready to strike, and Ralph had no idea what lay ahead. "Come on," Ralph said, urgency seeping into his voice. "We need to find out who that was." With shared motivation igniting an uneasy truce, both men stepped cautiously forward, the camera still gripped tightly in Ralph's hand, his ticket to unraveling the truth and perhaps even reclaiming his dignity from the depths of this shifting conspiracy. Together, they would delve into the depths of entangling secrets, unaware of how the stakes would only escalate from here, and that betrayal would come from the most unexpected places. Unaware of how the stakes would only escalate from here, and that betrayal would come from the most unexpected places. Ralph and Greg moved cautiously, their shoes tapping lightly against the concrete floor. The echo of the sirens started to fade, while a tense silence crept into the garage, thickening the air around them. Each step felt laden with the weight of their unspoken understanding, a camaraderie born from fear rather than respect. "Can you believe this?" Greg muttered, paranoia layering his voice. "This isn't just some petty dispute anymore. Someone doesn't want us digging around." Ralph nodded, his heart racing. The figure he'd glimpsed darting away was a ghost now, but its mere presence was haunting, a constant reminder that danger lurked just out of sight. Who could it be? "What do they want?" he asked, trying to suppress a shiver of apprehension growing in his throat. "I have my theory," Greg replied, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to see the creased face of a lurking foe. "But it's not going to be easy to figure out, especially not without those files." "How do you know about the files?" Ralph questioned sharply, the mistrust flaring again, but then he reminded himself they were in this together, however tenuous their alliance was. "The office is yours, Ralph," Greg replied, now eyeing Ralph warily. "Besides, if it's true, if someone's been watching you, you need to be careful. This isn't just office rivalry. You're in danger. No matter how much I despise you, I can't let them play us against one another," Ralph said, surprising even himself with the words. The truth was dawning, and the stakes of their divided loyalty felt weighty. They stepped deeper into the maze of cars, voices barely above whispers. "If we can track down that figure, maybe we'll find out who wants us to stay quiet," Greg proposed, his bravado returning as a dangerous glint ignited in his eyes. "Right," Ralph replied, still gripping the camera in his hand as though it were an artifact of power. "Let's check the surveillance room. It should be nearby." He led Greg towards the far side of the parking garage past the rows of parked cars, a chilling sensation coiling in his gut, the lingering suspicion that they were not alone. As they rounded a corner, they found a door marked security. Ralph pushed it open with bated breath, revealing dim lighting and racks of screens, each depicting various angles of the parking lot. The room reeked of stale coffee and tension, a perfect confinement for plotting schemes. "Start scanning for anything unusual," Ralph urged, quickly tapping keys while half expecting to hear that eerie laugh again, or worse, a threat looming closer than he anticipated. Greg picked up a mouse and started clicking through the camera feeds. The tension in their alliance surged as each flicker of a screen revealed a different corner of the parking garage. "Nothing yet," Greg said, scanning through the footage rapidly, impatience lining his tone. "We need to look for any movement." Suddenly, a flicker on one of the screens caught Ralph's eye. He leaned closer, heart pounding as he saw a shadow dart just beyond the reach of the light, moving like a wisp of smoke towards the exit of the garage. "There," he exclaimed, pointing emphatically. "Rewind it." "Who is that?" Greg obliged, pulling the video back 10 seconds. As the video played, the figure reappeared, dodging the light. They were clad in dark clothing, a hood pulled low over their face, a familiar outline that sent chills down Ralph's spine. "I've seen that stance before. I can't place it, but..." The moment stretched taut, each second drumming against Ralph's racing heart. "Well, we've got to figure out who it is," Greg said, shifting his attention once more. Ralph's hand trembled as he thought aloud, piecing things together, memories flickering like old film reels. "My assistant. No, Natalie wouldn't, would she?" The name felt heavy upon his tongue. Her loyalty had always seemed unshakable. Yet, Greg's eyes narrowed, a calculating look passing over his features. "What reason could she have to keep secrets from you? Unless she's mixed up in something bigger." They both paused uncomfortably, the implications unsettling. "But why?" Ralph murmured, desperation creeping in. "And what could be so important that she'd risk everything?" "It could be about you, about your career. Or it could be even more dangerous," Greg suggested, urgency tightening his voice. Just then, the sudden jangle of keys echoed through the garage, causing both men to freeze. Ralph's heart plummeted. Someone was approaching, someone who carried the weight of knowing. "It's a security guard," Greg hissed, the flicker of panic rising. "We need to hide." They ducked behind a desk, breath held tight, straining to hear muffled footsteps drawing closer. Ralph's mind raced through possibilities, the camera still clutched in his hand. Would it provide the evidence they needed to confront Natalie, or even track down the shadow lurking around them? The footsteps paused just outside the door, an ominous silence clinging to the air. Ralph exchanged a tense glance with Greg, then suddenly, the door swung open with a creak, flooding the room with a blinding light and revealing a figure, one Ralph had not anticipated. There stood Natalie, wide-eyed and breathless, as if she had just run a marathon. "You shouldn't be here," she exclaimed, her voice urgent, even panicked. "They're coming for you, Ralph." The gravity of her words hit heavy and hard, drowning everything else in uncertainty. Confusion clouded Ralph's mind as he tried to absorb the message while Greg remained tense beside him, weighing allegiance in a thin line. "Who's coming for me, Natalie?" Ralph demanded, his voice threading with anger and fear. "There's no time to explain. Just trust me, we have to go. Now." Before either of them could respond, the distant sound of voices echoed down the corridor, unmistakable and menacing. Time snapped taut, and with an urgency they couldn't deny, they sprang into action. The true confrontation loomed ahead, ready to plunge them into a web of betrayal and danger, where nothing was as it seemed, and alliances would be tested like never before. Where nothing was as it seemed, and alliances would be tested like never before. Without a second thought, Ralph sprang to his feet, instinctively shoving the camera into his bag as shadows and urgency collided. "What do you mean, they're coming for me?" he demanded, the words pouring out of him like a rush of panic. He could hardly grasp the gravity of Natalie's warning before their reality threatened to collapse around them. "Now isn't the time to talk. We need to get out of here," she urged, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. Greg, still close by, shot Ralph a questioning glance. The tension between them had shifted from simmering animosity to a collective urgency. "We'll have to trust her," he muttered under his breath, ready to move. But the choice was no longer just about trusting Natalie. It was about survival. The voices from the corridor grew louder, punctuated by the steady march of boots against the concrete floor. They had only moments to decide on their next move. Ralph could feel the walls closing in, the weight of their gathered fears crushing him. "Out the back," Natalie whispered, swiftly turning toward a hidden door he hadn't noticed before. It blended seamlessly into the garage wall, part of the very shadows they were trying to escape. Without waiting for another word, they followed Natalie as she swung the door open, revealing a narrow service hallway drenched in darkness. A flickering fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed ominously, casting strange shadows that danced on the walls, mirroring the chaos of their thoughts. As they slipped into the hallway, a heavy silence enveloped them. "What do they want?" Ralph finally asked, the words hanging in the chill air. "Why would anyone care about me?" Natalie glanced back, urgency in her eyes. "It's not just you, Ralph. This goes much deeper. They think you've stumbled onto something you shouldn't have. Ralph's mind raced back to the documents, the confidential files that had dampened his excitement and filled him with dread. You're talking about the proposal, he breathed, piecing it together. Yes, and it's important. They're trying to cover something up, and you're in the way, Natalie replied, her voice firm but edged with fear. If they figure out you're onto them, they won't hesitate to silence you. Ahead, Greg gripped the wall, his knuckles white. Then we need to expose them before they can do that, he said, a flicker of resolve igniting anew. Expose them how? Ralph snapped, frustration boiling over. The last vestiges of trust he had for Greg wavered under the pressure of their circumstances. You want us to walk right into their trap? We need proof, Natalie interjected, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You have the camera. It could be our saving grace. We can record what's happening, gather evidence, and take it to the authorities. Ralph stopped in his tracks, simmering in contemplation. But what if I can't trust you? He shot back, his emotions tangled with betrayal and uncertainty. I'm risking my career just by being here with you, Natalie shot back, fire igniting her words. If we don't act now, none of this will matter. They'll bury it all. Just then, the echo of footsteps grew more pronounced, closing in fast. Ralph's mind raced. Fine, let's get out of here. But as they pressed on, their hurried escape met yet another obstacle. A sudden commotion erupted behind them. Figures emerged from the shadows, their silhouettes cutting through the hallway like arrows aimed at their escape. Stop! They're getting away, a voice cried out, sharp and relentless. Ralph's heart sank. To flee now seemed impossible. Back this way, Greg yelled, rounding a corner and pushing forward, leading them into a tangle of rooms, each filled with forgotten tools and machinery. They ducked into an alcove, trying to catch their breath while grappling with the unpredictability of their surroundings. When did everything go this wrong? Ralph gasped, breath fogging in the cold space. We'll live to tell the story if we stay smart, Greg replied, voice low and steady. But the desperation in his gaze betrayed the bravado. Ralph could see that they were all grappling with fear. Natalie peered around the corner, her eyes widening as more figures flooded the main hallway, searching for them with ruthless determination. They're everywhere. Ralph turned to his allies, each face casting shadows of uncertainty. If we can just reach my car, I can get us out of here, he said, suddenly feeling that flicker of control diminish again over their chaotic encounter. No, we can't risk them anticipating our escape, Natalie advised, her determination rebuilding. We need to retreat deeper into the building, find a way out that takes them by surprise. Just then, the alarmed voices rang closer. Panic gripped Ralph. No outside help, no safety net. This was all on them. Right, let's go, Ralph called. They formed a huddled mass, moving deeper into the recesses of the building, the weight of their decisions hanging like a shroud. In their frantic search, the flickering lights above felt more like ominous heralds of impending doom with every step they took. Each room they passed was a mere echo of the lives lived within them, yet they pressed onward toward the unknown. As they made it through a narrow corridor that twisted and turned, Ralph couldn't shake the feeling that time would run out before they discovered how deep the conspiracy really went. Tension thrummed like a live wire, and he could only hope they would uncover the hidden truths before it was too late. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a storeroom filled with outdated computers and flickering screens. The urge to dig through the chaos ignited fire in Ralph's chest. What if we find more evidence here? He suggested, voice steadied by hope. Natalie nodded, urgency kindling once more. But we need to be quick. Let's check the main server. If it's still running, we might be able to extract information that could tie everything together. As they crouched behind a mess of equipment, Ralph felt the gravity of their situation weighing heavily on his shoulders. The search for truth had spiraled from a simple proposal into an intricate web of deceit, and now their only hope rested on the thin threads of their alliance. The imminent sound of shuffling footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway, pulling them taut with fear. The game had shifted from one of ambition to one of survival, and there was no turning back now. With eyes locked, they all understood. The time to confront the shadows lurking in their lives was at hand. Together, they would either break the cycle of betrayal or become the very secrets they sought to uncover. The stakes couldn't have been higher, but Ralph could feel the embers of determination ignite within him, ready to blaze a path through the darkness that threatened to consume them all.